to start off praying because I need to calm down a little bit, I think. All right, let's pray. Father, I just want to put you in front right now, put you up on the stage here and just be a vessel that you can speak through. I ask that the words that I speak would be your words, the message that I give would come from the heart that you've placed within me. I ask that your Holy Spirit would speak to each person a message that they individually need to hear, or that we as a people need to hear. I thank you for the journey that you've had me on. I thank you for all of the different side roads and uphills and downhills that it's been. I thank you that it has culminated in what can be a message that I speak from my heart and from my own journey. I do not despise the difficult times that I've had that have led to this. I'm so grateful for them. So I praise you and I put you forward. I lift you high. In Jesus' name, amen. Oh, okay, well, welcome. This has been the culmination of a long, long journey for me. It started really 20 years ago when I first got married and left college. College was where everything was very settled and stable. I knew what I was, I knew where I was headed, and just like I had been for years since I first started kindergarten, school was what I knew. And then suddenly I was married, and I didn't know who I was anymore, and I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know how to be a wife. I didn't know how to be a youth pastor's wife. I left college, and I was no longer a student. I was no longer an athlete, and everything that I had known about myself was gone. And I had to figure out what was going on during that time. I struggled to put any sense into what was happening to me, and I didn't have a lot of people walking with me during that time, helping me figure it out. What eventually came about after quite a few years of suffering and struggling and not finding my place was a language that I could speak that made sense of things. And it's amazing to me how when we can put words to something, or when someone else can put words to something that we've been experiencing, then suddenly we have a new handle on it, and we can have a sense of how to behave in the midst of that. Language is a very powerful tool to give us a sense of movement, a sense of direction. And so this language that came for me was the language of liminality, of liminal space. And maybe this is a new word for some of you, which I'm happy to share, and I want to get this language out there. But I would imagine I can pretty much say with complete confidence that each one of you know this language, even though you may not know the word. It is a part of the human experience to go through times of transition. Every culture around the world has faced or has some form of transition time for their people. America may be one of the cultures that's the worst at it. And so we really suffer from not having some of the forms of transition that other cultures have embraced, and rites of passage, so to speak, or opportunities for people to figure out how to behave and act when they're set aside from what they've known, but they haven't yet entered what's next. Which is what I want to give you, the definition of liminality, of liminal space. It is when we have left behind what we've known. Maybe it was a stable setting in our families. Maybe it was a place that we lived, a job. It could have been a state that our experience had taken us to, that we knew how to act. And then suddenly we're thrust into a place that we don't know what to do anymore. We don't know who we are anymore. It's brought on by a lot of just common human experiences. A woman gets pregnant, she's got 9 months to prepare, and then suddenly her life is different. Not just hers, but her husband's as well. And they are in a liminal time then, trying to figure out, how does this look now that we've left behind the freedom of young marrieds with no kids, the freedom to work the amount of hours we wanted to work, the freedom to be spontaneous whenever we want to. They've left something behind, and they're entering a time period where they're readjusting, and they haven't yet figured out what their family life is going to look like. It happens when we leave jobs, and we are in between jobs, and we have no idea where the next job is, and we're left to figure out who we are when we don't have that job as our identity. It happens when we lose somebody, and there's a death of someone who formerly was a part of our understanding of life. And when that person's gone, then suddenly we have to figure out who we are without them. So many common human experiences send us into this space. But what so often happens is that we try and run from it. We try and manage it. We try and figure out how the quickest pathway through this is. What do I need to do to figure this out and get to the other side? What do I need to do to get my life in order so that now that this new thing that's come into my pathway, how do I manage it so that I can settle back down again and life can go back to stable and normal? What I have discovered just from studying these passages is that desire to rush through things may mean that we're missing something. It may be that God has a very important character development to create in us during the in-between times. It may be that He wants to give us a new vision, a new life. He's got so many gifts for us in the middle of that liminal time. If we run through it as fast as we can and try and manage it, we have the potential of missing the whole point of it. And I would hope today, before you leave, that you get a sense of what some of these gifts are of liminal space, that you can begin to open your heart and your mind and your eyes and your spirit to what God may be doing. Whether or not you're facing it now, I promise you'll face it in the future. If you've already faced it in the past, maybe this will give you a chance to go back and rethink some of what happened during that time period and give it a new perspective. One thing that's clear, our culture does not affirm liminal space. We do not get affirmed and valued during this time. It is not the American way to wait. It's true. I even, on my phone now, I wanted to change my calendar, and I went to edit the little calendar date on there, and it wouldn't do it. It wouldn't, let me change the time. I waited 5 seconds, and I was mad already. What's happening here? And it caught me. I just don't like waiting. We don't like waiting for things. And that waiting is very much based, the hatred of the waiting is very much based on my expectations of instantaneous change or help or whatever I want. So not only do we not like waiting, but we have expectations that push us to want speed, and we want what we want, and we want to move forward. We want progress. We also are given this sense when we're young that we can accomplish anything. Haven't we been told? You can do anything you set your mind to do. Hard work, perseverance. I know a lot of us, we want to tell our kids, you have such great potential. You can be anything you want to be. And I wonder if sometimes that sets them on a path to have expectations that are not God's expectations. Because then whatever they want to be is what they go after, instead of saying, what does God want me to be, and what is His timing to get me there? And then by the time they're 25 years old, they've graduated from college, if they're not getting what they want, then suddenly they're lost. That was my experience. I was told I was going to accomplish great things, and then suddenly the only thing I'd accomplished was I'd found a husband. And I wasn't that excited about it. As great as he is. It was tough. And he would be the first to tell you that I was not who he thought he married during that time. I had been this driven, passionate, devoted visionary that knew what I wanted out of life. And then when I didn't get it, and I was having to wait on it, I became a depressed, unhappy, mean. I just became somebody else. And I don't blame my parents for telling me that I could be anything I wanted to be. But I do know that it's part of our culture to not make space for in-between times, to not give us the sense that there is timing to good things, and they don't always come right away, that good things are often developed. And maybe people who live and work in an agricultural system, even here in America, maybe they understand waiting a lot better than the rest of us who don't work in agriculture. Waiting is not part of what we're taught when we're young. I want to help us to embrace, again, a sense of the beauty and value in waiting for good things, even as difficult as the in-between times may be, even as difficult as the circumstances that led us there may be. Oftentimes our response to this is to get some sort of therapeutic help. And self-help is a big thing right now, isn't it? Go read a book, go to a seminar, go to a conference, get some help with this. There's all kinds of stuff that we can gather. We go see a therapist. We want to find a way to get through this. And God may be saying, I don't want you to get through this. Gerald May is a psychologist and a theologian, and he's written a book called The Way in the Wilderness. And he talks about moving beyond coping, because coping is often what we talk about. This is the language we use when we talk about being in liminal space. We need to cope with this. How are we going to cope? I want to read you what he says. I've come to hate that word, because to cope with something, you have to separate yourself from it. You make it your antagonist, your enemy. Like management, coping is a taming word, sometimes even a warfare word. Wild, untamed emotions are full of life, spirit, vibrant with the energy of being. They don't have to be acted out, but neither do they need to be tamed. They are part of our inner wilderness. They can be just what they are. God, save me from coping. God, help me join, not separate. Help me be with and in, not apart from. Show me the way to savoring, not controlling. Dear God, hear my prayer. Make me forever copeless. I would like you to be able to leave here copeless and say, I will not run from this. I will savor, I will embrace, I will enjoy. I'm not saying it's going to be fun. Hear that, okay? And I'm not saying that it's all going to be good and it's going to be full of blessings. I am saying that you don't have to cope, that you can instead savor and grow and be challenged and be shaped by these times. We're going to throw off coping. What I want to walk through with you today as a way to say, how can we not just cope and make something our enemy, but instead participate in it, move and press into it. I want to give you some of the postures of how to embrace and participate with what God is doing. Instead of saying, God, what are you doing? Just tell me and I'll take care of it. We want to participate with Him, however He wants to move us along. And so the best way to participate is to get in the right posture for that participation. By postures, here's what I mean. It's the position or bearing of the body, whether characteristic or assumed for special purposes. It's also the state or condition at a given time, especially with respect to the capability of particular circumstances. So it's like my posture in the marketplace, my posture in the family. It's also a conscious mental or outward behavioral attitude. Especially number 3 is what I'm meaning here by posture. It is a choice that we make of our heart, and sometimes a choice that we make of our physical nature as well. We may have to make physical choices in the midst of this, but what I really am talking about is our heart, the state, the condition of our attitude. Each posture that we're going to talk about assumes 2 things. One, it assumes that there is a hopeful, positive, expectant outlook on this, This posture means that you are expecting something, okay? It is not a posture of resignation. It is not a posture of standing there and saying, do your best. It is a posture that says, yes, bring it on. I'm ready, okay? So we have to make that assumption in these postures. And the second one is that it assumes that there's a willingness to participate in whatever restructuring happens. So, if you're going to take this posture, I am telling you there will be change that goes on deep in your heart and your soul. If you are not willing to let some things be run through the ringer, then you might as well not even take the postures. You will need to be prepared to do the work, whatever it takes. And that's what's assumed in these postures. One of the things I've learned when studying liminal space in the field of anthropology, which is where this term first came about. Some anthropologists had studied the rites of passage of cultures that are not industrial cultures. They are more of the native cultures who have it figured out a lot better how to help people transition through different life stages. One of the things that they do, especially for their young men, for example, is they send them out. They grow up as children living with the women in the women's section of the whatever compound or whatever community that they're in. At the right time, they send them out into the wilderness. It's in the wilderness where they are unstructured. They don't know who they are anymore. They're not children. They're not yet adults. They have to learn to survive. They're visited by mentors during that time. They receive a new name. They experience a very unique culture amongst themselves out in this wilderness. And then at the right time, they're brought back in and reintegrated into the culture where they are called by their new name, they're treated differently, they live with the men at that point, and they're considered men. Now, these three phases are very distinct. There's the separation phase, where they go through a ritualistic a process of their mothers letting them go out into the woods, a preparation for it, and then a letting go. And then there's that in-between time, that marginal time where they live on the margins of the woods there outside of the community. And then there's a very ritualistic re-entry point. Well, this fascinated me, and I wondered if there was something to be gained from seeing liminal space in these stages for us. And I think there is. I think that you'll maybe be able to even look back on some of your own in-between times and be able to recognize the point of entry and what that whole little phase was of separation that went on. And then there may have been a short or a long in-between time where you were doing the work and having to figure out what was going on during that time. And then, and maybe if you're in liminal space right now, you haven't yet experienced the re-entry, there is a point where life gets established again, and you take whatever you've learned about who you are and what God has done in you, and you know right where to apply that, and you get a sense of a new vision for life, and you embrace that new vision. That restructuring actually gets put into place. So these three phases, I've applied them here in a broad way concerning these postures. But I do want to tell you that they don't fit neatly, okay? So this isn't a neat little package, even though I've got it neatly outlined on your notes there. If you know me at all, you know that I don't live or work or believe in linear progression of anything. So I know that it looks like it, but it's not this neat. If any of you have been through loss, have faced loss and gone through a process of mourning, you may have heard of the stages of grief. There is no neat little way to walk through the stages of grief. They come tumbling through your life at random times, at unexpected moments where you go from one to the next and back again. And this process of these phases of postures, they are the same way. You don't get to just start with one, figure it out, nail it down, feel really good about it, and then move on to the next one. Figure that out and get really good at it. And I please hear me, I'm not going to give that to you, even though I'm giving that as just a way to work our way through this. I also am not going to should on you, okay? I'm not going to should on you, and I'm not going to do on you, okay? I'm not telling you that you should do these things. And if you just did these things, then you would figure out liminal space, and you'll be all better. And, I won't do that. If you take that from this, then you've not heard me correctly. What I want to invite you to is to participate in a journey. And everybody's journey is different. Everybody comes out with a different change that happens in their life. Everybody processes through this at different paces. And it's more of a circular motion. So hear that with these postures. All right, well, the first posture that I would like to talk to you about, which the reason that I give this as a posture that begins with the separation phase is because I do feel like if we can take on the posture of hospitality early on in the journey and maintain that posture all the way throughout, it helps the other postures stay in motion. And so some of the other postures are going to be harder to develop if you don't start with a posture of hospitality. And so you may be bumping up against some of the changes that you feel like you just don't know what to do with, or the time period suddenly starts feeling like it's dragging again, and you're so unhappy, and you may need to go back to the posture of hospitality and say, I've got to develop this one further. I need to put it as the foundation. So here's what hospitality is. There's clearly, in American culture especially, but I really think as human beings around the world, a need to mark spaces, isn't there? We have lines, we have doors, we have border lines, we have crossroads, we put fences up, we've got walls around our yards. We mark where we end and another person begins. And this can be good interpersonally. Boundaries are important. I think that it is also good to just recognize when we cross those, isn't it? Like you need to know when you're stepping onto your neighbor's yard, especially if they keep their yard different than yours. You don't want to just kind of mow wherever you feel like, right? We need to understand and know when we're crossing a border. These are opportunities every time we cross a border, and they can be doorways, they can be moments in time, they can be life events. We can run right past them, or we can pause, and we can make note of it, and we can honor that boundary crossing. We do this fairly well when people get married. We stop and we honor that they have crossed over a threshold. We do it fairly well just because we have to with having babies. Clearly, we have to stop and honor that moment. We can't just run right past it. But we don't do it very well with a lot of the other things that come and go in our lives. We don't stop and say, and now there's a change happening, and I'm going to pause right here, and I'm going to welcome it. I'm going to take a posture of hospitality that says, as I enter, something is different. I would love to see us all just start marking entrances and exits a lot better. When I was a teenager, I was given an idea for a discipline, a prayer discipline, to say doorway prayers. And it was amazing when I started saying a prayer every time I walked through the doorway, how many doorways I walked through in a day. And if you think about it, if we paused at doorways as a discipline of honoring the change of space, think of how different we would be as we entered a new space. As you walk into the hallway, if you honor the change of having just been in this place to now being in an in-between space in a hallway, as we start to pay attention to the changes that happen just on a daily basis, it can be a metaphor for how we can honor the changes that happen during liminal time and start to embrace the newness of every new place. One of the things that came to mind as I thought about hospitality, I was a basketball player all the way through college, and we had a couple of girls. They were oftentimes our centers, the really tall girls that were a little bit stiff, and they were stiff whether they were shooting or running, it's just harder, I think, for bigger girls. And we had to learn to have what was called soft hands. If you try and catch a ball and you have your arms out locked and your hands tight, What happens when that ball comes at you? It'll bounce right off your hands without time. You won't have time to react once the ball hits your hands. If you have your hands loose and you have your fingers soft, and you're prepared when you catch that ball to receive it, when you receive it, you have to bring it in closer to you, right? Have you seen that? Catch a ball, and they bring it in as they catch it. It's something that we teach children fundamentally when they're first learning to play basketball. Catch the ball and bring it in towards you. This is called having soft hands, and I thought, what a great metaphor for having a hospitable spirit towards whatever God is going to bring or whatever life is going to bring during liminal times. It's to have soft hands that are ready to receive whatever is coming and bring it in close instead of say, no, I don't like change. I don't want this. This is going to be awful, and prepare yourself for the worst. Instead, prepare yourself for what you can receive from it. Hospitality is one of the ways to develop soft hands. The idea of a doorway is good too. When we walk through a doorway, there's a sense of change, and there's a woman who, her name is Esther DeWall, and she wrote a book called, let me get the name right, To Pause at the Threshold. She tells of a Chinese tradition that has some insight here. Let me read it to you. She says it very well. When I visited Japan, I experienced